Today, on Rise Up, we commemorate the day of Ashura, a day etched in the heart of history, a day of both immense sorrow and unwavering strength. We remember the sacrifice of Imam Al-Hussain, the beloved grandson of the Prophet Muhammad who stood for truth in the face of tyranny. He, along with his loyal companions and dearest family, gave their lives not for power, not for gain, but for justice, dignity, and the preservation of faith. It is a wound that continues to speak to every soul that yearns for justice. Today, we don't just mourn, we rise with their message. This is Rise Up.
Welcome to Rise Up. I'm Alia Halal.
Very good morning. Welcome to Rise Up, Irfan Alamgir.
Today is the 10th of June, which according to the true calendar, which has been revealed in the Goal of the Wise by the Riser of Sadiq, is the 10th of Muhurram. And that's why, as the viewers might have seen in the intro, the focus on Imam Hussain is what we're going to look at today.
Yeah, it's the holy day of Ashura. And Muhurram being in June may come as a shock or surprise to some of you who are watching and listening. But the fact of the matter is that the Prophet Muhammad and his family, with whom the true knowledge of religion lies and the true knowledge of all the sciences lie, they taught us that actually it was a solar calendar, which is the correct way to have the months and the timings according to the year. So there is a level of consistency. Ramadan qualifies as the 12th month, December. And Muharram comes number 6, and there is a very interesting section written by Abu Sadiq in the Goal of the Wise to give reasons for why the calendar was lost. It's the same reason as why the Kaaba was lost. The same reason why the prayers and the fasting and everything else was lost. And it was a big part of it had to do with what happened on the 10th of Muharram on the plains of Karbala in Iraq. Around 1400 years ago, with the grandson of the Prophet, Imam Al-Hussain.
Yes, it's a very significant part of history and a central part of history for ourselves, because we know that it was the reason, one of the main reasons for the breaking of the covenant that the Muslims are responsible over. And that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who had brought a new covenant to the world, these acts of brutality, these acts of inhumane behavior that the Muslims showed, total hypocrisy, claiming that they were Muslim while they were praying, but also at the same time beheading the grandsons of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is an abominable act that cannot be easily forgotten. And while doing these acts, unfortunately, the scholars of Islam continued to preach that the Muslims must fast and give their charity to them and pray. But when you are engaged in murder and in martyring, not just anyone actually, but the very flesh and blood that comes from the household of your own messenger and prophet, then this is a little bit problematic. This cannot be something that God just, turns away from and doesn't look at. He will be offended by this act. It's an act of complete and utter insolence, and it has consequences. We are people that say that these acts, according to the narrations, are the reason why we see such a cursed situation at the moment. If you go ahead and look at the history of Islam, there's so much that happened that shouldn't have happened from the Muslim nation. And those who were not part of it directly were unfortunately very silent observers of the events where the imams who are appointed in the will of Prophet Muhammad were not given their rights. And they were categorically martyred one after the other. And it's a very bloody history. It's a very terrible account to read, but at the same time, it's necessary. And I really encourage anyone out there who's watching and listening to realize and understand this and see that you owe it to yourself to go ahead and research this, because that which is found in the mainstream may not always be how it's actually gone down. It's not perhaps being portrayed properly or accurately. You should go ahead and see what happened. See it for yourself. Research what happened with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How did he actually die? What happened on his deathbed, when he was on his deathbed? What happened right after he passed away, before he was even buried? The politics that ensued. What happened with his family members? What happened to his daughter? And who was responsible for all of it? It's a very troubling history, but at the same time, it's necessary to understand how it is that we reached the place that we have reached today.
Yes, absolutely, Ali. And growing up, I came across a narration in the Sunni Sahih books, and it was my kind of introduction to Ashura and what it meant for us as Sunni Muslims, those people who, by my family at least, we were following the religion as we grew up, and it was an inheritance from my grandfather going back all the way God knows when, but it was the form of Islam which says that the Prophet Muhammad did not appoint a successor, and Sunni Islam basically believes is that the people chose Abu Bakr to be the viceroy, vice regent of the Prophet Muhammad, and it was on account of the fact that he was the most senior in age and he was the Prophet's best friend. Anyhow, the Sunni books of Hadith stated that Ashura was a very holy month, and the Prophet said he visited some Jewish people who were living around him at the time in Medina, and he asked them, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're fasting today." He said, "Why are you fasting?" And imagine the Prophet Muhammad asking why somebody's doing what they're doing. But regardless, it's an interesting narration. And the Jewish people say, well, we're fasting because it is the day where Moses, and this was the 10th of Muhurram, Ashura, it is the day where Moses gave us victory and led us out of the land of Egypt. It was on this day that the great blessing was given to Musa alayhi salam and to the Israelites as his chosen people of God. And this is why, and it says, in response to that, the Prophet says, well, Moses is closer to us than he is to you, and we will also fast on Ashura, and therefore it became a tradition within Sunni Islam that it is highly, highly recommended that you fast on the day of Ashura. And that was the only understanding that I had of that particular incident. That was my introduction into Ashura. So when I became Shia, when I realized what the truth was and that the Prophet appointed very, very clearly his successors and named them in his will, and that Imam Hussain was not just a grandson of the Prophet through his daughter Fatima Zahra, but he was actually directly appointed by God as the third of the 12 Imams mentioned in the wasiyat of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and what happened with him, and the tragedy of the 10th of Muhurram, it really became the most shocking part of my spiritual journey to God. Because I could not believe, I couldn't believe what happened and how he was treated and his family was butchered in the desert, thirsty. And when I say butchered, I really do mean it. It was one of the most violent methods of murdering the Prophet's family. And your imagination, if you don't know about what happened in Karbala, approximately 50 years after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, then you don't know anything about Islamic history.
Exactly.
It was that great aliyah differentiator, that thing that distinguishes between truth and falsehood. And then it became a gauge by which I judged the scholars of religion, anybody who said they knew anything about Islam. If they didn't know about Karbala and what happened to Imam Hussain, I wanted nothing to do with that individual.
Makes sense.
Right?
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, what a critical part of Islam and the history of Islam and the history of that nation that calls itself the nation of Muhammad. But if they would not even know, or perhaps they would be indifferent to even sometimes, the tragic events that took place in Karbala with the grandson. I mean, we're talking about his direct grandson. We're not saying some descendant that came, 10 generations later. The direct grandson that would play on his shoulders, that would come and while the Prophet was praying, he would come and climb onto his shoulders and be playful, because he would be this little boy that was around his grandfather, watching him as the messenger of Allah. Imam Hussain was a very key player in the establishment of Islam itself. So for the nation to attack him and his family like that, it is very distressing if you don't know about it and you then find out. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Yeah,
because then, it made me realize one thing very, very clearly, that knowledge has nothing to do with being on the right path very quickly, because there are people who have literally memorize the Quran word for word, every single surah. They'll give you the exact reference. You give them a word and they'll give you 3 references of where that word is found in the Quran. They have literally memorized it inside out, and yet they stand on their pulpits and they say to their group of followers, those people who blindly follow their wilayah, whether they know it or not, and then they say, may Allah be pleased with the killers of Al-Hussain. You know, that was a really shocking discovery, you know. And like I said, Karbala and the day of Ashura, which actually has nothing to do with the Israelites or fasting or anything of that nature, it has everything to do with the murdering of the wilayah of the Prophet Muhammad and his Ahlul Bayt. There have been some exceptional works done in terms of depicting what happened, in terms of the documentaries and series that have been made. It's the cornerstone of Shia Islam. Why? Because again, it represents that watershed moment in Islam when the guidance was taken away from the Muslims because of their own actions. And when I heard that scholar say, may Allah be pleased with Yazid Lanatullah alayh,
in which universe is that acceptable?
Exactly. Where are we? What times are we living in? Because there's no room for doubt. There is clearly good versus evil. And anyone who has any confusion in recognizing or distinguishing between the light, where the light is and where the darkness is, they are clearly not from the lights of the prophets and the messengers. They're clearly the spawn of the devil. And to be honest with you, anybody who says that Karbala was just one of those things where it was a political disagreement between brethren and one brother ended up slaughtering the other by cutting his head off with a knife and putting an arrow into the neck of a baby and then putting his head on a spear and parading it through the streets of Damascus. If this is just a brotherly misunderstanding and just a political nuisance that happened in a fitna and just dismissing it out of hand, then you know that person is far, far away from any light, any guidance, or any understanding of religion.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of very, you could liken the event of Karbala that took place with Imam Al-Hussain, you can liken the significance of it to the very heavy and very tragic significance of the crucifixion, the event of the crucifixion, the fact that Jesus Christ, while being the Messiah, was completely betrayed by his own followers, his own people, and they arrested him, they flogged him, they mocked him, they abused him, and in the end they basically put him on the cross. And we say that it was not him but a likeness of him, etc. But the fact is that he did endure great trials and tribulations at the hands of those who claimed to believe in God, those who claimed to be the children of Abraham. Those were the ones who were in the end responsible over what happened to Jesus Christ. And similarly, the same thing happens in Islam, where Imam Al-Hussain is appointed by God, and he's meant to be that imam, that guide, that caliph. But he's not left alone, because those who opposed Islam in that day and age, in particular the family of the Bani Umayyah, they ensured that they would not leave Imam Al-Hussain alone. And the individual in that time who claimed to be the caliph was Yazid, the son of Muawiyah. Now, Yazid was different from Muawiyah in a certain sense, which is that he was not very politically intelligent. Muawiyah had this understanding that if he had gone after the household of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam
in such an overt way,
exactly, if he knew that if he did that, it wouldn't work. He worked more along the lines of propaganda. He would work on the scholars who would go to the pulpits, and he would tell them what to say to the people. He would train his people to go ahead and start giving bad stories of Imam Ali and his sons, try and convince the masses that the Ahlul Bayt are not needed, they're not significant, right?
He was a clever devil.
Yes.
And Yazid was more like a slobbering dauphin.
Yazid was not, in any sense of the word, a politician. He was not a diplomat. He was nothing. He was really a mess. And there are records, and even this is why I'm always confused by the Sunnis who try and praise Yazid. They admit that Yazid was known to be a drunkard. He was known to be a very, very indecent human being. Let's just put it like
He's
that.
like the same as the character of Nero, right? It's very hard to defend him in any way, shape or form as a humanist.
He even burnt the Kaaba.
Yes, I mean, God
History
Almighty.
has it that
and
he
Sunnis believe
set the Kaaba on fire, and the Sunnis say, oh, you know, accidents happen.
Yes.
So apparently it's fine when Yazid does an accident. Now, the idea behind what we're saying is that Imam Al-Hussain as an individual, peace be upon him, had nothing to do with war. This is the most tragic part of this whole thing. He did not want to engage in a war with any part of this faction. And while he was traveling with his family, he was ambushed. He was terribly ambushed by the army of Yazid. Yazid had sent his people out. He wasn't even there himself. He had sent his people out to fight on his behalf. And the events that ensued were terrible. Imam Hussain was not standing with a giant army behind him who were standing there to fight with an enemy. He was with his own children, with the women of his household, with his daughters and with his sisters and with his companions, many of whom were very old, some of whom were very young. And it was not by any stretch of the imagination a battle. I don't like the idea that people think it was one army against another. We call it an army because in the end they had to become an army that defended themselves. But know that this was an absolute ambush. And it was such a tragic event that took place that there are stories in history that put it down, specific details of what happened to different individuals in the entire story. But it's interesting to note that Imam Ahmad al-Hassan, from him is peace, the first of the 12 Mahdis, he said once to Abu Sadiq, who relate to us, that if the people actually knew the true story of Karbala, what they know of Karbala is nothing. If they knew the true story of Karbala, it would be enough to turn their hair white because of how terrible it was. And I think what we do know is already extremely heavy on the heart.
Oh my God, yes. Of course it is. I mean, how can it not be? I mean, it's such vivid portrayals of the massacre that happened, the trampling of the horses, the breaking up of the bodies, the catapulting of those people with severed heads towards their family members while they are in prayer. I mean, they really did break all sinister bounds of any kind of respect and law. And this is the family of the Prophet Muhammad. This is the master of the youth of paradise. Imagine. It's indefensible. Anyone who utters a word in favor, even if it is just to create there's no reconciliation on this. You cannot reconcile what happened.
Brush it under the carpet and pretend nothing happened.
Yes, you have a big problem with your monotheism. The Prophet Muhammad wants nothing to do with you if you in any way, shape or form are supporting the massacre of Al-Hussain. It's impossible. This is not compatible with faith. This rejects God himself. And this is because the Prophet said it. He said, Hussein is from me and I am from Hussein. What does that mean? That means if you kill, butcher, behead Hussein, you've done the same thing to me. And he wouldn't have said those words if he didn't know what was going on. And the Prophet Muhammad knew exactly what would happen to his family members after him. And he warned them and his people, my Ahlul Bayt, stay close to my Ahlul Bayt. I don't want anything from you except that you look after my near relatives. And so many times, but then those words fell on deaf ears. And Alia, you mentioned something really interesting that I want to bring up again. This is like the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, but much, much, much worse. Because now you have a situation where you have to imagine the crucifixion happening simultaneously alongside the unveiling of Mother Mary and flogging her, and also getting all the disciples and chopping their heads off.
My goodness.
And also
the
setting...
children.
Yes, exactly. The children as well. Imagine the brutality of these people. These were much, much worse than those people who were involved, the Romans and the Pharisees that were at the heart of the whole tragedy that happened, or at least when they tried to kill Jesus in the apparent. This was much, much worse. And actually, Abu Sadiq recently revealed that with Al-Hussain, peace be upon him and pieces from him, were not just mere individuals who were just a part of the extended family. Abu Sadiq revealed to us that the companions of Imam Al-Hussain, the closest of the companions, were the returned prophets and messengers themselves.
Yes, they were.
Right?
They were.
So this was not just a butchering of the family of the Prophet, but of personalities like Al-Abbas, the son of Imam Ali, and the sons of Imam Al-Hassan.
Yes.
and so many others that we could go on and on and on about their names and their bravery and their courage and their refusal to leave the side of their Imam and be willing to die for him with a smile on their face in the name of truth. And these were all those people who had been in the past prophets and messengers that returned with Imam Hussain. So this was literally the killing of the light of God through his prophets and the messengers. And it's one of the biggest stains in Islamic history, that it is really that thing that differentiates. If you can understand what happened in Karbala, and you can see exactly where the truth is. That event shows you the truth is with Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Because the alternative, because if you don't believe that, then you believe that the religion is with the Umayyads. Because the Umayyad dynasty then became what we call Sunni Islam. This is a fact. The Umayyads, if you would go back there, you ask them, well, do you believe that the family of the Prophet Muhammad are the true successors, as he said in his will that they would be? They would say, absolutely not, we are. This became, later on, what we called Sunni Islam. And from dynasty to dynasty, it went to the Abbasids and then the Ottomans. They were all the same. They were self-appointed. None of them had anything to do with the Prophet Muhammad or his choosing of his successors. And this is the legacy of Sunni Islam. So if you are somebody who is just calling themselves Sunni by the mere fact that you were born to Sunni parents, and this is a really critical time to re-examine that sort of chance occurrence that happened, that you just happened to be born into a Sunni family.
Yeah.
On the 10th of Muhurram, on the day of Ashura, you can wake up and you can choose to follow those people that were named by the Prophet Muhammad, and you can find the road to salvation.
I think that that each person who is listening to our words right now does owe it to themselves to go ahead and research what took place. It is a very graphic story. We're not going to go into the details of it here, but it suffices to say that it did take place. This horrible event happened, and we remember it for a particular reason. And this is where we are a little bit different from others who do remember this event as well. Because you'll find that in 12 Shia Islam, the event of Karbala is a very significant event. As you said, Dr. Fan, it's like the cornerstone of Shia 12 Islam, and they believe that their principles and their stances and all of that which they hold on to comes from Imam Hussain in Karbala. However, I think the greater tragedy that took place after what happened in Karbala is actually what happened after Karbala. And what took place after Karbala was a series of unfortunate events where those who claimed to be the Shia of the Imams would engage in mourning, would engage themselves in these practices and rituals of remembering what took place and creating this kind of this scene of being very broken down and miserable and weeping and crying and self-flagellating even. And they do it till today. This was done, according to them, to preserve the message of Imam Hussain. They say that we must do this in order to never forget. We must never forget what happened, and we will never forget what happened. And that's good. No one should ever forget what happened to Imam Al-Hussain. In fact, how can they? It's such a great stain on the history of mankind. However, it happened for a reason. Imam Hussain allowed so much misery and so much torment to take place for a very specific reason. And that's that he had a legacy to uphold. He had a banner to keep up. And in order to actually revere Imam Hussain and honor his sacrifice, we must do the same. We must hold up the same legacy in his name, and we must hold on to the same banner in his name in order to actually honor him, right? However, the Shia do not do that. While they mourn for him, they do not hold up his legacy. While they say that what happened to him was brutal and wrong, while they're enraged against his enemies, they have no problem in walking behind the same enemies today. And this is where the line between those who follow the Qaim Abu Sadiq and those who claim to be Shia, that's where you see that line. Because it's very easy to sit and mourn and cry and self-flagellate. It's easy to identify with rituals and hold on to the inheritance of your forefathers, which is to remember Imam Hussain in Muhurram, and then when Muhurram is over, when the month is over, you go back to your normal life, and you continue to support tyrannical leaders, you continue to turn a blind eye to the wars and the rumors of wars, and you mock and attack the successor of Imam Hussain in this day and age. It's very easy to do all that. What's very difficult is actually to do what Imam Hussain did. And what Imam Al-Hussain did is, he said, I will never pledge my allegiance to a tyrant like Yazid. Meaning what? Meaning, to be from the people of Hussain, we cannot pledge our allegiance to tyrants. We cannot support tyrannical systems. We cannot sit quietly and not rise up. We actually have a thing to do now. Imam Hussain has made religion a practical, applied thing. It's actually something you do. It's dynamic. It's not something you sit and think about. It's something you stand up and do something with. But the 12 Shias unfortunately don't do that. And this is why it's very, very critical that we explain that to the people, that Karbala is not just a bookshelf. It's not a series of letters that you read and you put away, which is what the Shia have made it now. It's something that you live and you breathe. There's a very famous kind of slogan that the Shia have, which is that when you die, you should die like Hussain. But why don't you want to live like Hussain? Hussain lived his pledge to God. He lived the banner that he was raising. He did not allow anything to come as something more dear in his heart to that banner. Not a single child of his, not a single family member, not his own life. Nothing that he owned in his life was more precious to him than the principle of the supremacy of God. And that's what we're supposed to be doing today. So anyone who loves Imam Hussain, anyone who actually loves what he did and reveres him and honors him, has to honor the supremacy of God. And there's only one way. There's only one way to honor that supremacy of God. There's only one way to honor that principle. And that's to find out who is Hussain today. Who is the man today who's holding the same banner and who's walking in the same path and who's being attacked for the same reasons. It's his very successor, the Qaim of the family of Muhammad. Is there another way to honor it?
No, very well put as well. And these tragedies in history, they're there for our reflection, these things that have been preserved in time. And when you analyze what happened, it really does reveal, like you said earlier, there's an exterior enemy and an interior enemy. And if you examine the crucifixion of Christ, then this is something all Christians should do, because this is their version of Karbala.
Yes.
So what happens is, there is a man called Jesus Christ. He appears. He says, I'm the Messiah. Follow me, and I will lead you to the land that is promised you, that land of milk and honey, the divine just state. He has enemies. Okay, the exterior enemies are the Romans, right? They are the occupying force of the time, and they are the ones who are meting out these brutal punishments to the Israelites, and they are ruling them with an iron fist. But there's an inner enemy as well. And the inner enemy among the Jews who are living in Israel at that time, in that land, they are the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious scholars, the religious elites, those members of the Sanhedrin, etc., who are foremost in opposing Jesus and actually co-conspirators and chief collaborators to plot the demise of Jesus Christ. And now you see Christians today, they question whether the Roman Catholic Church may have altered the narrative a little bit. It seems like such a obvious truth, right? Those people who put Jesus on the crucifix and crucified the body of Christ using nails this thick that were drilled into his wrists, and then left him to hang and die, then form the Roman Catholic Church and pick and choose what is the truth of the story of Jesus.
What is that about?
Right? And then you have the Jewish scholars. Those people who are supposed to be the most educated and learned about the narrations and the scripture are calling for the blood. And they are the ones who influence the nation to vote for Barabbas over Jesus. And it is very apparent their overt enmity towards him. And now, fast forward 600 years later approximately, and you come to Karbala. And you see the exterior enemy are the tyrant Muslim rulers, Yazid ibn Muawiyah, the Umayyads, who from the very get-go have been opposing the Prophet, that cursed tree that starts with Abu Sufyan, and who opposes the Prophet, tries numerous times to kill him, and every Muslim knows this. And then Muawiyah, who opposes Imam Ali at every stage, and then Yazid, who is of course the murderer, the one who ordered the killing of the Hashemites in Iraq, in Karbala. So this is the external enemy, the rulers, the Muslim elites. And then you have the Kufans, the internal enemy, those people who call themselves Shia but then cower away when that moment of need is there. And they actually played a very instrumental role in the demise of Imam Hussain, because they are the ones who invited him and said that they would support him in Kufa if he would come and lead them. They're the ones who wrote the letters, made the promises, and then broke every single promise that they make. So it's always this external and internal enemy, and this is something that we have to reflect on. I think it's really important that you brought that up, that there were people who said, the overt enemies, we're going to kill you, we hate you.
The obvious ones. The
obvious ones, Yazid, Lanatullah alayh. And then you've got the people who call themselves the followers.
The Judas Iscariots.
Judas Iscariots. And who's more deadly? That's the question.
Yeah, it's always the enemy closest to you, the one that claims to be a friend. The one that stabs you in the back? Yeah, the one who's claiming to be a friend. And yeah, that's the bitter truth of religion and religious history, really. It's that this kind of, the inner enemy is so much more sinister and dark and harder to kind of locate or realize. And now that you can look back and in retrospect see what's happening, the Muslim nation has no right to pretend nothing happened. And just to wrap up this conversation, I do want to add that one thing that Imam Hussain established and made very clear, and he did this great thing, he did this great sacrifice that is unparalleled in history. You'll never find someone do what Imam Al-Hussain did. You'll never find a man as resilient in his stance as Imam Hussain is. You'll never find someone so willing to really truly give up everything for the sake of God the way he did. He did not just speak, he actually put it into practice. And he really shames anyone who has any excuse left in the book towards supporting God in this day and age, because Imam Hussain showed that there was nothing that could come in his way when he wants to establish the supremacy of God on earth. Now, the fact is that in doing so, he kind of tells us what religion is about. Because think about it, the people who were opposing him in the enemy lines, who were they? Were they Christian? Were they Jews? You know, were they atheists? They were Muslims.
Exactly.
They were people of the same nation that claimed to believe in the grandfather of Imam Hussain. They were people that prayed, people that were fasting, people that gave in charity. They said La ilaha illallah. These were people who had memorized the entire Quran. A lot of them were actually the scholars of the time.
There you go.
These were people, the army generals were the ones who actually had the authority to write verdicts, and they would, what we call fatawa in Arabic, and they would write these verdicts about the fact that Imam Hussain was allegedly a criminal. They said he's a criminal, he is breaking the law, and we must kill him. There was a murder warrant set out for the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, and it was shipped out into all directions of the Arabian Peninsula, and it garnered such a great following that all these tens of thousands of so-called Muslims gathered in opposition to Imam Hussain. And then you have Imam Hussain standing here saying, yes, I am not going to pledge my allegiance to Yazid. And note this, that the people of the army of Yazid were calling Imam Hussain blasphemous, corrupt, okay? They were calling him all sorts of slurs. Why? Because in their world, if you don't pledge allegiance to Yazid, you're an apostate, you're a heretic. Religion has always been about the ruler. It's always been about who is the man who's meant to lead, who is the man who's meant to rule, who's meant to be on the seat of authority. The corrupt side, the side of Satan, said it has to be Yazid, and if someone doesn't accept that, we have to get rid of them. Imam Hussain establishes and says, no, it has to be the man God has appointed, which is myself, and therefore do not follow me if you don't want to, but I will not follow that man, and my people will not follow that man. So Imam Hussain established that religion is not about prayer, it's not about fasting, it's not about your rituals, it's not about how do you enter the room, which foot do you use, it's not about how do you make wudu, how do you put a hijab on? How do you not eat certain foods or drink certain drinks? This is not the point of religion. Imam Hussain established religion is about the king. It's about the man who has authority. Religion is a man. And now, in this day and age, to sit down and say, well, what happened was really terrible. Anyway, let's go pray and continue to support our tyrants and our political figures and just not worry about the Middle East conflict and just not go to Starbucks anymore, etc. This is a huge insolence against Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, because they've already established by their blood, they have spilt their own blood to show and prove a point to the Muslims, which is, if you want to support God, you have to support the vicegerent of God in your day and age. So to the Muslims out there who are listening, if you want to find that successor, then look into this call, look into this matter. If you want to continue with empty rituals, you can go ahead. But don't then claim to be a follower of Imam Hussain. Because to be a follower of Hussain ibn Ali, it means to stand like he did in the face of the tyrant and say enough.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to wake up from this sleep that they've fallen into, this sleep of heedlessness, need only contemplate on Karbala and what transpired on the 10th of Muhurram. The saying of the Imam Al-Hussain, who has now returned as the first Mahdi, Imam Al-Hussain, from him is peace. He said, "Wake up, O dead ones, wake up, O sleepers." And Karbala really is that wake-up call for all of us on the 10th of Muhurram today. So I really hope this message reaches your heart. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens the eyes and ears of your heart. And if you do have a soul, then may you feel the truth of this tragedy that happened, and may it wake you up to prevent any further tragedies like this from occurring. Karbala will never be forgotten. It is kind of really been etched into our hearts and minds, and it is something that we will carry with us as a motivation to do good and as a way to prevent evil. And we will never allow the butchering of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad like that to happen, as long as we still have air in our lungs.
That's what we're here for, isn't it? The point of Rise Up is to basically bring people to realize, hey, you know what? There is bad things that have happened. There are bad things that have taken place, but they happen for a reason. It's so that today we can do something different. So let's do something different. Actually, people are doing different things all the time now. The people who claim that they believe, and they are proving it, that they believe in the successor of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, are the very people of this holy community, the people that are with the Rise Abdullah Hashim Abu Sadiq, and this global community that we have of tens of thousands of believers, men and women who are actually following in the footsteps of Imam Hussain and his companions due to the guidance and the leadership of the successor of Imam Hussain, and that is Abdullah Hashim Abu Sadiq. And we are a people that believe in the fact that God appoints the vicegerent of the time, and therefore we're standing up, we're rising up, and we're beginning a spiritual movement that is really garnering a great following. And because of this, the Yazids and the Muawiyas and the Judas Iscariots of today are unhappy, and they're doing their best to attack this call. And as you said, Dr. Irfan, we're not going to sit quietly and just, watch it happen. We're going to rise up, which is what we're doing right now. And a great team that is doing that is our human rights team.
Yes,
who
exactly.
Actually recently went out to Liverpool for a convention that took place. I think Amnesty International was heavily involved in this, and it was really interesting because it showed that like-minded people can get together and do great things. It doesn't matter what your background might be. It doesn't even matter what your religion might be, because the great thing is we believe in humanity first. And we are repeating what took place in Karbala. And something that took place in Karbala is that many people of different nations and different religions actually stood up in defense of Imam Al-Hussain, such as the Christian Wahab Nasrani, such as this army of Hindus that came all the way from the subcontinent, from Asia. They traveled up to Karbala because they had heard the news of what was taking place. But then they were in great
almost
grief.
like those three kings from the East,
the Magi,
right?
exactly.
The Magi, yes.
And they unfortunately reached the scene too late. They came after the tragedy had already taken place. But there were people from different religious backgrounds saying, hey, what's happening there is not okay, let's go help. today that's what's happening right now. Abu Sadiq is holding up a banner of humanity first, and we've got different people around the globe who are saying, hey, we stand by you guys because, humanity first sounds like a good idea. Yeah. Why not try that? Let's not fight. How about this? So, should we go ahead and play the footage? There's a lot of amazing footage that we managed to take of the event. Let's go ahead and check it out.
The Ahmadi religion of peace and light is a peaceful religious minority. I call for their protection against hate speech. Everybody has the right to practice their own religion without worry, without persecution. It's a human right.
Religious figures like Sayyid Ali Akbari should be held accountable for his hate speech against the Ahmadi religion of peace and light.
The Ahmadi religion of peace and light is a peaceful minority that promotes human rights, but instead of support, they're facing hate, threats and violence. This has to stop. I, Elek Gemeinuddin, call for their protection against hate speech and for their right to peacefully practice their faith.
I call for the protection of the Ahmadi religion of peace and light against hate speech and incitement to violence, and for their detained members worldwide to be released, as well as the protection of all religions.
Religious figures like Sayyid Ali Akbari should be held accountable for his hate speech against the Ahmadi religion of peace and light.
I want to raise my voice to ask for an end to hate speech against people of the Ahmadi religion of peace and light. I believe in freedom of speech for all religions, and I don't see why this one should be subject to so much hatred.
The religion, peace and light is a peaceful religion's minority. I call for their protection against hate speech.
I am calling for the protection and for the right of people to peacefully practice their faith. In particular, the Ahmadi religion of peace and light is a peaceful minority that promotes human rights, but instead of being supported, they're facing hate, threats and violence, and this has to stop.
People like Ali Akbari and Muhammad Hijab are inciting violence.
I call for the protection of Ahmadi religion of peace and light.
I believe that the Ahmadi religion of peace and light should be able to practice their religious beliefs without being targeted by hate crime. Being able to practice your religious beliefs freely is a human right.
People like Ali Akbari and Muhammad Hijab are inciting violence against the Ahmadi religion. This shouldn't be happening, it must stop now.
People like Sayyid Al-Akbari are inciting violence against the Ahmadi religion of peace and light. This is hate speech. This has to stop.
Fantastic here to be here in Liverpool at this Arts and Human Rights Festival. Cultural expression is a universal, creative kind of basic need for people, for humans, and that includes, if there are people of faith, and there are many, and have a religious background, that includes expression of religious preferences, culture, customs, faith and all of that, and none of that should be suppressed or even targeted at these communities through hate speech in any country. And unfortunately, the Ahmadi community in a number of countries around the world are being really targeted in quite a violent way upon. So please join to protect that community and help and extend solidarity.
Yeah, I cannot express the gratitude I feel when I see these like-minded people getting together and saying it for what it is, because it is what it is. It's a black and white truth, free of bias, free of hatred, free of intolerance. Yeah. That is just the true expression of a person. What you're hearing, all these different people standing there, they're not part of the community. They're not, for anyone who might be wondering who's speaking there, these are activists. These are people who believe in the fact that all human beings have rights and they should be given their rights. They gathered in Liverpool for this Human Rights Festival, and they are expressing their angst and their grief and their anguish when they hear about the persecution that the Ahmadi religion of peace and light is facing all the time worldwide, and we're so grateful for that.
Yeah, these really are the three wise men from the east, the Hindu Brahmins who showed up in Karbala.
Exactly.
These are the humanitarians. They really feel passionately that the persecution of people for their beliefs and smearing people and hate speech should be something that is not tolerated, and showing up in their own time to give support to our religion, to our faith, is these are great human beings, and it's for people like these who showed up to support something that they're not directly involved in, but because they believe that humanity comes before religion, it is these people for whom God sent the Mahdi.
Yes, and I think it is about time that we just wake up and smell the coffee.
Yeah.
Enough with this whole
Karbala is the best wake-up call
My
for anyone.
goodness. Imam Hussain completely abolished the fallacy of religious identity. He just says, you know, all this idea that you have of what you look like is what matters, what you do as a ritual is what matters, you know, what you eat and drink is what matters, how you dress. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. If it did, then he wouldn't have taken his family, allowed that they get ambushed, because Imam Hussain stood there and he could easily at any moment have said, fine, I give up, I pledge my allegiance to Yazid, just leave me alone, leave my family alone. But he said, no, we're not going to abolish the religion of my grandfather, because if he had done that, you see, if he had said, supremacy belongs to the people, not to God, I give up, take my banner, rip it into pieces, just let me go, there wouldn't have been any Islam. There wouldn't have been any religion right now, because the whole point of religion is that, and he wouldn't allow that to get taken away. And if it had been about a dress code, he wouldn't have been in that situation, seeing that the women of his household are having the veils ripped off their heads by these diabolical animals on the other side. He endured so much. He sacrificed such a great thing. And he did it because religion is not about the veil. It's not about the prayer. It's not about these silly things. Religion is about understanding where the supremacy of God lies. Why? Why are we so insistent on that? Because in order to have a world where people are given their rights, in order for people to be able to live in a dignified life with their human rights given to them, where they're able to eat and sleep properly and live in a house properly and prosper, for that to take place, you need to give control to the man that God appoints, not to the others, not to those usurpers and infiltrators, not to those who are from Camp Satan, but rather give it to the person that God has appointed. Why? Because they can ensure that you have what you need. That's the whole point. When God made Adam, Adam was a believer in God. He was a monotheist. He was a caliph. He was a godly man. He was divinely appointed. Now, if you take it away from Adam and you give it to Iblis and you say, okay, Iblis, Satan, you rule, what will happen? What will happen is what you're seeing today. What will happen is a conflict in the Middle East. What will happen is wars between Russia and Ukraine. What will happen is people dying on the streets and everyone just saying, it's fine, let them. We're going to go pray in the masjid. That's what will happen. And that's what we're supposed to be changing.
Yeah. No, I really like what you said also about the aftermath of Karbala being arguably a greater tragedy than what actually transpired on the land, because you would think that those people like yourself who were born into a Shia family and who had this immense advantage over somebody like myself, because you had this understanding of what Karbala represented, and to be courageous and strong and not be afraid to lay down your life if it's a cause that you believe in. I mean, we would get that from like the Hollywood movies maybe, but this is a real life event. And I think, I often do think about this, you know, those people who had exposure to the story of or to the events of Karbala, this must shape your personality in a completely different way, that willingness to sort of stand and fight and have that narrative to kind of inform the way that you react and respond in certain situations. If you understand Karbala for what it is, it will definitely make you a much, much better human being.
It should. Ideally, that's what you'd hope, and it should, exactly as you're saying, Dr. Irfan. I believe that fully with all my heart. But we're seeing it's a very interesting phenomenon, though, that takes place. And those who are being raised with these values and with this knowledge of what happened, they're also being raised with the idea of supporting mainstream ideas and supporting the system and supporting the status quo. And that's what is not working anymore. You can't gel the both together. But people are trying to. That's the issue. We're seeing that right now. What is the point of Karbala? What did Imam Hussain do? He said he couldn't care less about the mainstream. He said, I'm not going to stand by a mainstream corrupted system. I won't. I refuse, point blank. He said, point blank, I refuse. And look what it did. Look what the consequences of that were. Today, the Shia, the so-called Shia, they want to hold on to their mainstream systems and they preach it. They say that this is part of being a believer in Imam Hussain, which is insanity. And completely against his whole sacrifice. And at the same time, they want to sit down and they want to mourn and cry. And they have made the idea of crying over Imam Hussain and mourning over him and his family, they've made it like a switch that you can turn on and off, that you can turn it on to cry and then you turn it back off again. And this is a very weird kind of phenomenon that's taken place now in this particular sect of Islam. We say that if you actually want to mourn for Imam Hussain, then live by his ideals, stand up for him. You know, like he gave up so much. What was it for? Do something with it. You can do something with his legacy. And you won't do something with his legacy by supporting systems that, and there's so much corruption. My goodness, you know, one day I really wish we could just sit down and go through everything step by step, each of these points of what takes place in Muslim nations due to these scholars, due to these tyrants that are on the seats. We sit here and we talk against the scholars a lot of religion. Not all scholars, there's nothing wrong with being a scholar, but those who claim to be these these religious scholars who sit down with their turbans and they preach, we're against them in a great way. And we tell the people, hey, there's all these ahadith against the scholars, right? It's not just because we don't like how they look. That's not the point here. They are actually very evil. There's a lot of bad stuff going on, right? And all the way from prostituting women openly in countries like Iran to stealing money from people and opening up talent shows and claiming that the money is going to charities in the Middle East when there's nothing happening. It is a very dark world right now, you know.
I mean, look, the Sunni scholars, they are like the Sadducees, right? And they are trying to erase the memory of Karbala. The Shia scholars are like the Pharisees, and they are trying to pervert the memory of Karbala. So both are working and doing what Iblis wants them to do, which is to completely distort the message of Karbala, which is a revolution based on a willingness to put down everything, including one's life on the line, in the name of the banner of truth, which is supremacy is to Allah, and only God can appoint the caliph. And it was for this, this was the fight, this was the struggle.
This was the fight. I think that's the thing. If you don't know about the story of Karbala, if you don't know the stances that Imam Hussain took, if you haven't heard the great things that he said on the plains of that land, then please go ahead and find out. He single-handedly basically put it into stone. He has made it so you can't erase his message now. You can't forget what he did, and he saved religion. He saved the idea of monotheism on earth by what he did. And it's so fascinating to me that every time you want to look for the true religion, right? You want to look for the true successor. You want to find that man that links you back to God, as you put it so well before, the umbilical cord, right? Back to God. If you want to find it, you'll see that there's this heritage that they bring, which is they find human life sacred. They say the human being is sacred. They find sanctity in the human being. And they say that this is more important than other things, than anything else. And they say that the human being is so sacred that it should never bow its knee down to another human being, because it's too great to do that. The creation of the human being is so great. People are so important to God that He will never allow that they bow down to each other. He will only allow obedience to Himself. He will only allow submission to Himself. He will never allow that people submit to other people, because we don't deserve that. We deserve much more. and to ensure that he puts his spirit in one man and says, you be my voice, you be my face, you be my representative, go out there and tell the people what I need them to know, and make them happy, make them safe, and feed them and shelter them, and teach them about love, and teach them about who I am, and let them understand that if they want to know me better, then let them find me in each other, and let them see each other as sacred. This is what God does. And what do people do? They say, hey, bow down to me, obey me, and let me suppress you, and let me subject you to my authority. And this is why the world looks the way it does.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? We have a few pictures of the event. I think we should go through those before we get into more topics, because there's so much to say about Karbala. I think we could go on.
Karbala is a universe, isn't it?
It
has so many different videos within the actual event. There were so many things that happened, but yeah,
so
you're right, we could go on for hours and hours.
We really could. Let's go ahead and check those pictures out first from the festival, and then we're actually going to go back to the topic. We have some segments in the lineup about the topic, but let's see what our brothers and sisters did. So, you know, it's very precious to me that they went out and did this, actually, because they are living the message of Imam Hussain, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They are living it to a T. And there's Sister Hadil, who's a very well-spoken lady who represents the dawah on the front lines when it comes to the slogan of Abba Sadiq, which is that humanity is humanity first. And there she is.
There she is.
She has the banner of the ultimate non-conformist when it comes to the Iblisian method of rulership. And he is saying no. Abba Sadiq says yes to God, and this is the people who have learned from him and have become reflections of him in the public eye, and they're very good representatives of his message. And I wish them all the best, and I hope that this project expands greatly. And we have the right people in the right places, but we need more.
Yes, the doors are open. Let's go ahead and increase in number. Let's continue and show the world that, hey, you know what? It's not about how you dress. It's not about what you eat. It's about putting humans first and saving the world.
Yes.
I mean, people have made saving the world like a cringy kind of idea, but this is exactly what we need. The house is on fire. My God. Imagine you've got a house set on fire and people are saying, hey, you're not wearing the right clothes. Go put something on your head. You know, you're saying, hey, the house is on fire. Let's take this fire out. Let's, you know, find some water. Please, I need help. And somebody walks up to you and says, well, you know, I know the house is on fire, but let's talk about something a little bit more important. Why are you not covering your hair? The insanity of it, you know, it is literally like that, is it not?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is absolutely the right kind of metaphor to try and get the point across. We are like on the brink of our whole civilization stands on a knife edge because of the evil that we have allowed in positions of power and authority, and we're more worried about the black beanie or the color of somebody's jacket. And what is this about? This is ridiculous.
Why
and
are
this
you
is coming from the scholars. This is a trivial aspect focused on by trivial minds, and this is the reality of and the evil of the scholars of the end of days, the scholars of the religion, who are specifically put there in their place by the devil, and they are from his spawn.
Yes, they are. We have a great segment coming up next, and it's to do with Karbala and some of the key figures of that event. Let's go ahead and check it out.
So many heroes. Every day is Ashura, every land is Karbala, as we ended. And this is a message that says that these kinds of atrocities, although perhaps not as graphic and obscene as what occurred on that fated day, that ill-fated day, but we are seeing this struggle happening everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Anytime somebody raises their voice up against a tyrant and they are butchered, for example, or their family is, a member of their family is abducted, or they are taken off the streets in these disappearances that are happening all over the place, and essentially tortured to make phony and false confessions, that they then use that to hang that person or to inflict all kinds of other brutal punishments. And these crimes are happening on a day-to-day basis, and those people who are inflicting these crimes and punishments on the innocents, they are repeating that what happened in Karbala, where innocent individuals who are moving as a family unit to a place of safety because they are being persecuted and hassled, and they cannot live in their hometown, and on their journey they are suddenly they're ambushed by an army with weapons and horses and arrows and swords and spears, and put to the death. And not just put to the death, but starved and deprived of water. You know, all of those basic things that you would expect. I mean, this is something you cannot forget. This was a family unit. There were children and women and tents. And elderly. People who were trying to get to another location because they're being chased out of their homes. So when we talk about those people who risk their lives in the rubber dinghies to find a better life in Europe, for example, and who die and drown in trying to reach it, it's a very similar thing. The conditions are so atrocious in their homelands that these people are fleeing. They are refugees seeking a land that they can live in as human beings.
Yes.
Their lives have become so atrocious. They're willing to risk their lives. I mean, how is that any different? And I think that message that every land is Karbala, every day is Ashura, is something that will echo to the end of time, at least to the end of humanity's time on this planet. And this is why these initiatives that Sister Hadil and the Human Rights team or the Outreach team or any of our teams here, we are inspired by that message. And Karbala to a large extent is a driving force that makes us push ourselves to the limits and be willing to put it all on the line in the name of Hakimiyat Allah, or that allegiance is to God.
And you cannot apply the teachings of Karbala without the riser of the family of Muhammad as your guide and your leader. You cannot say, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work, because he has made it possible. He is making it possible to not pledge allegiance to Yazid. There is no other place on earth where you are safe from that besides by the side of Abu Sadiq. There is no other way to avoid pledging allegiance to the Yazid of your time other than by supporting the Hussain of the time, and that is Abu Sadiq in this day and age. I think it goes without saying, you know, you don't have to look too far. You just have to quickly take a glance at the will of Prophet Muhammad and check out what the names of the successors were and what the list was and what was meant to be, and you'll find the name Abdullah right there. And you'll find that in this day and age, there's only one Abdullah in 1400 years saying, I am the successor of the prophets and messengers, and conveniently calling for peace in the Middle East, and also conveniently having a plan for the divine just state, and also, subhanAllah, having all these people from different nations gathering around him, as was prophesied would happen with the Mahdi, and also walking up alongside the scriptures and bringing them back to life by actually applying those teachings, and so on and so forth. I mean, raising the banner that's been described to be the banner of the Mahdi, coming from Egypt, putting a platform there that speaks to the people about the Mahdi, and the list goes on and on. There are so many different things that we could say about the riser Abu Sadiq and how he is truly that successor of Imam Hussain. There's so much we could say to prove the point, but anyone who has looked at him and watched him and listened to him cannot deny the fact that this is truly the son of Imam Hussain. This is a man who is actually bringing forward those teachings and has not just heard about Karbala, but is living Karbala every day. For Abu Sadiq, every day is Ashura, and every land is Karbala, because that's exactly what his whole mission is about. It's about the same thing. And then if you look at his stance and the way he does it, it really reminds me of the first quote that was in that lineup of quotes that we saw, that was by Lady Zainab, who's the daughter of Imam Ali and the sister of Imam Hussain. So imagine that in Karbala you've got Imam Hussain there, and he also has his family there, right? So one of those people were his sister, and she was such an incredible lady that history has done a disservice to her by not mentioning her more and not telling us more about her life, because she is such an incredible, inspiring role model for both women and for men. That as a woman, she became the leader of that tribe after Imam Hussain had been brutally martyred, and she took charge of the situation. She stood up in the face of those terrible soldiers that then ambushed the tents and tried their best to harass the women and the children and set fire to those tents. She saved the life of her nephew, the only remaining living son of Imam Hussain, who was the next Imam in the line of Imams who did not go to fight because of how terrible his sickness was and how feverish he was. He was not even in a state of consciousness, and she pulled him out of a burning tent. Can you imagine this elderly lady? She was a middle-aged lady at that point, and she goes there and she pulls out her grown son, her grown nephew, who's a grown man, and she picks him up by herself and runs out of a burning tent to save his life. What a horrifying scenario to be in. And after all of what she saw, what does she say in the face of Yazid when they are shackled in chains and dragged to the court of Yazid? And she's standing there. She looks at him in the face when he tries to break her spirit. He does this one final blow to try and break the spirit of this great lady, because she's standing there resilient after everything that's happened. Days of no water, no food, watching the children crying all the time, and she just stands there and he says to her face, "Look how God has dishonored you and your family."
Right.
And what does she say? She says, by Allah, we have seen nothing but beauty. Can you imagine going through all that and then saying, I have nothing to be ungrateful for, everything's fine according to me, where I'm standing it looks good?
Yeah, sheer defiance in the face of a tyrant.
We were talking about gratitude yesterday. I mean, if you want to see gratitude, look at Lady Zainab.
Yeah, no, it was an awesome stand, and it's one of the most powerful speeches ever delivered, I think, by a lady that's been recorded, because she really did have that eloquence of her father, the Prince of the Believers, and she spoke with the same kind of passion when she expressed herself. And she was such a pivotal figure at in the aftermath of what happened in Karbala, and she was the one who kind of led the charge in terms of confronting the tyrant and revealing the truth to the masses that were gathered in Damascus, who had no clue about what was going on. They'd already, within 50 years of the demise of their prophet, they had completely become detached from the reality of the political situation at the time, and they had no idea what was going on because they had no imam. They were unfortunately shackled to a false claimant like Yazid. May he be cursed, who was completely bereft of any goodness. And it was a victory, even though in the apparent it may have seemed like defeat, but the victorious speech of Lady Zainab will live in history forever. And like you said, Ali, it's a real honor for us to be associated with this character who in Karbala really did speak the words of God, and it is something that we always turn to for inspiration when we find ourselves in similar situations.
That's so true, right? This is something that really it strikes me every time I find myself in a difficult situation. I realize, well, how can anything be more difficult than what Lady Zainab went through? And despite everything, she only saw beauty in what happened to her and her family, because she knew that they had done something right. They had done something good. They were the only ones on the face of the earth at that moment who were standing up for the supremacy of God. So peace be upon Lady Zainab and every single person that is from that event and that story that stood by God. And we have, I think, another segment from the words of Imam Al-Hussain. Let's go ahead and see that and honor him and his memory today again by remembering his lessons and his words.
Yeah, it just goes to re-emphasize that this sacrifice was from the greatest and clearest of signs as to where truth is and where falsehood lies. Karbala, that great differentiator, that great distinguishing event that makes it plain and clear for all those with eyes to see with hearts to contemplate with, and those people who are in the business of employing their intellect as sentient creatures who live on planet Earth. Anyone who hears or sees about what unfolded on the plains of Karbala in Iraq will know that this was an event where the truth was with Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and that Iblis, the army of Satan and Lucifer, were with Yazid and the Umayyads. And anyone who says otherwise really needs to re-examine their heart. And yeah, it was just this absolutely epic line in that presentation that said that Hussein had to be slaughtered in Karbala so that his son, the Qa'im, may reign on earth. It was that sacrifice and that verse from the Quran where it says, we ransomed him with a great sacrifice. Of course, God had commanded in a dream. He told Prophet Abraham, this is, of course, alluding to that incident where he said, offer your son, Ismail alayhi salam, as a sacrifice. And of course, in the end, God, of course, told him not to do so and to sacrifice the ram instead that he provided. But the great sacrifice did indeed happen.
That's so fascinating. And it was from one of the descendants of Abraham, ultimately, as Imam Hussain is a descendant of Ishmael.
The son of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
The son of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is the thing, I think that it's very critical to understand this. Karbala was a pivotal moment in history that took place, but it's repeating itself today.
Yeah.
It's said by Imam Al-Hussain that we are in a new Karbala now, but it will be a different Karbala. A Karbala where it will not be victory through sacrifice, but victory through the establishing of a divine just state. And what is a divine just state? It's a place where God's appointed rules. That's a divine just state. Because when God's appointed rules, then people prosper. Then it's Eden. Then people are taken care of. And those who flock to that Eden are safeguarded and are taken care of and are happy. And it does take sacrifice. My goodness, I mean, can you imagine walking up to this Eden without going through your own Karbala? You have to let go of family, you have to let go of dear ones, you have to let go of possessions, you have to let go of careers, you have to let go of studies, you have to let go of this dream that you might have had in the matrix, thinking that actually there's this illusion that you're creating in the lands of Yazid, this illusion can be something beautiful, but it won't be, because it's under the rule of the tyrant. It's under the rule of someone who allows the killing of children, who allows the women to prostitute themselves in order to feed their families. We do not want a world like this anymore. We want a world ruled by Imam Hussain and his likes. And in order to achieve that, in order to be a part of that, we must let go of that which is cancerous and sickened and diseased. We have to let go of it so that we can go towards that which is beautiful and good and healthy and divine. But people don't want to excise those tumors.
They don't want to take those tumors out. And one of the other sayings of Imam Al-Hussain that I love so much, and that was such a beautiful collection of his statements about Karbala and Ashura, but he said also that Karbala was the place where the ana died, where the ego was killed. And we often talk about the spiritual battle, that jihad against the nafs, against the self. And I think this beautifully reflects the words of Lady Zainab when she was poked by Yazid, and she said, I saw nothing but beauty in Karbala, because she saw the divine attributes really shine with their greatest potency, with their greatest visibility, because here you had people who were going to, for example, fetch water for kids who were literally starving to death, and they were dehydrated to a point of delirium. And you know, that scene where reluctantly Abu Abdullah Al-Hussain, peace is from him, sends Abbas to go and get the water for the children, and this is his only mission. And the way he is literally cut into pieces as he comes back, holding the pail of water that leather skin they had back in those days in his teeth, because both of his arms were chopped off, and he fell first to the ground with his face on the floor before he let the banner of allegiances to God falls. So these were the heroic acts and attributes of God that was shown on that day, and it really was the death of the ana. And again, Karbala gives such ability for those people who walking the spiritual path to show that resilience and to remember what these great souls that came down to endure that event, what they went through and what they accomplished on that day was the most beautiful and greatest of victories. And now the Qa'im, the son of Al-Hussain, has come as the avenger to establish the divine just state with that Hussaini spirit very much alive and kicking in his community.
Yes, exactly. It's so chilling, you know, when I hear you say that account and the fact that, you know, these stories are real. They actually happened. People actually have gone through this, and it's extraordinarily painful. We actually know and believe in this day and age that these incredible souls didn't just leave. They came back. They came back because the work isn't over yet.
SubhanAllah.
You know, there is a lot of work to do right now. There's a world to save. There are people who are suffering right now, and God in His greatness sees all of His children in that state of suffering, and He allows that these people who've already sacrificed so much continue their mission because they want to. Imam Hussain isn't done yet. You know, he has a Karbala to re-establish. He has revenge to take, and revenge to take doesn't mean that he's going to attack his enemies. It means he's going to save the oppressed. And that is the greatest revenge against the devil. It's to save people. We believe that Imam Hussain has returned, and he's in fact, as you said earlier, Dr. Irfan, he's the first of the 12 Mahdis, Imam Ahmad al-Hassan. We believe that Ahmad al-Hassan is Imam Al-Hussain in his return. And what a great revelation that was. What a great revelation that was.
Supreme revelation. It was a very powerful and emotional day for all the believers when that revelation was made through the riser of the family of Muhammad al-Sadiq, and it made sense finally of all those narrations that says that Al-Hussain will be the first from the returned, and that he will be the one who does the hunut and the burial ceremony for Imam al-Mahdi. And I was like, what is that about? How can that be the case? You know, what's going on here?
I always wondered, like, is he going to descend from the clouds? Like, you always wonder what these things will look like, because you hear, you know, like Jesus will come from the clouds. Like, how? You know, you want to know. You want to envision it. We try and we don't get it because it's allegorical. It's all allegory. It's not literal.
But it does reveal a very important truth, because we know from the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt that only a Hujjah can perform the ceremony of the cleaning and the embalming and the burial. Only an Imam and a successor can do that, to the point where Imam Hassan al-Askari, when he passed away, his son Muhammad ibn al-Hassan was only a few years old, 5 or 6 I believe, at the time of the passing of his father Imam Hassan al-Askari, the 11th Imam. And there was somebody who was going to lead the Salah of the Janazah of the passing away of the 11th Imam, and the 12th Imam, who was a mere boy, he was like, this is not your responsibility, move aside.
Took over,
And he took over and he led, because only a successor can do it. So what this narration tells us, that Al-Hussain will return through the Raja, which every Shia believes, and he will be the one who does these funeral ceremonies. What does that tell you? It tells you that he is the successor of Imam al-Mahdi. And he is the Yamani. He is the first one to return. He is the forerunner, the sign that precedes his apparent kind of appearance in the public domain. And this is what exactly happened. Imam Ahmad al-Hassan, from him his peace, told us the truth of Raja, and he said, I am the return of Al-Hussain, and I bring now the next covenant, the 7th covenant, through his son al-Sadiq. So this is where we stand poised in history. It's a very exciting time to be a believer, and if you're a true Shia and lover of Al-Hussain, then we shed tears for the suffering, but we use those tears not as a sign of weakness, that our enemies can roll us over and do with us like a cat with a mouse, throw us from place to place. No, these tears are like the fuel of the soul. They give us the ability to ascend that spiritual ladder and move closer to God by willing to put it all on the line and shed every last bit, every last drop of tears, of sweat and even blood, whatever it takes to make this divine just state happen, because this is what Satan definitely does not want.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what What do we gain by sitting and crying? The devil doesn't get defeated by our tears. He gets defeated by us rising up and doing something. There's nothing wrong with crying over grief and anguish. In fact, to cry over the love that we have for Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, for the prophets and the messengers, it's a beautiful thing. It's a human attribute. How can someone hear the story from Imam Hussain and not cry? But what do you do then? Do you sit and cry and do nothing? You know, do you call people over to eat food together or to self-flagellate together in a ritualistic practice that serves no purpose?
This would upset the Prophet Muhammad and Al-Hussain more than anything else.
Of course it would. It's offensive. I mean, to be very honest with you, I would like to just do a quick little experiment here and put myself in the place of Imam Hussain right now and imagine giving up all that, so much, giving up so much, giving up everything. Nothing is left. You don't have anything left after you give everything up like that, except, of course, God the Almighty. And then you are martyred in a brutal way. And you know that you're leaving behind daughters and sisters and wives and aunts, and they're all in the tents right now, and your son is sick in there as well, and what's going to happen, and now you're gone. And so much bad stuff happens to them after you've gone, etc. Now I can imagine generations after myself, people who are crying about me. It's like, okay, that's really nice. You guys are worried about what happened to me. That is sad. But then the thing that I died for, where is it? Oh, you don't care about that. You care about the fact that I died. Well, what about the thing that we were trying to protect? Are you going to continue protecting it? No, you won't. I think I would be very aggravated by that, to be honest with you.
And like you said, Ali, Karbala, instead of being a catalyst for spiritual awakening, because of people not realizing the central message of the whole incident and what it means and what it represents, they have now generated these scholars for dollars who sit on the minbar of the Prophet of Allah, and they have this ability to press a button and make tears come out. These crocodile tears of theirs that have no action behind them, because they have no connection with God. They have no concept of what wilaya is. This is something that is especially predominant amongst the Shia scholars. This is why I call them the Pharisees, because they actually have the will in their hands, and they use it to recognize 12 Imams as successors of the Prophet Muhammad, but they reject the 12 Mahdis mentioned in the same will. This is an absurd preposition, and this is why they are very much accountable, much more so than those people who can maybe plead ignorance because they haven't heard of the Prophet Muhammad, let alone the will of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, and they are therefore the worst creatures under the sky.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. We are not endorsing or supporting anyone who is getting paid thousands of dollars for how much they can make masses of people cry in a sensationalized drama, instead of actually upholding the legacy and saying, hey guys, let's not support systems of corruption.
Yes, and just like you placed yourself, you know, this vicarious scenario where you were able to look at the Shia world through the eyes of Imam Hussain, you can also step into the body of these scholars, and they are absolutely ridiculous, because I was watching one of them give a speech, and he then, of course, starts talking about Karbala, and he's like, the only thing he changes is the intonation of his voice.
Oh, yes,
right?
yes.
So he'll be like, and Al-Hussain, and then there's no tears coming out of his eyes. It's like a charade, it's an act.
It's offensive.
It's deeply offensive.
It's deeply offensive. We don't like this. Yes. We find it very offensive.
Disgraceful, disgusting behavior, and fake.
I wouldn't accept it for my parents.
Yes, I would walk out.
If someone were pretending to cry over my father or my mother, I would be so deeply offended. I would walk out and say, "There's no reason for acting. It's what are you trying to prove? Let alone the master of the youths of paradise, the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Absolutely not. 100% no." And to those out there who say they are Shia and say, but this is how we preserve the message, I say, why don't you preserve the message by living it?
Yes.
Just live it, you know. Why don't you just stand up and do something with it? And very quickly, for those who say that, well, what do you want us to do about it? Here's what we want you to do about it, okay? Are you ready? Let's just tell them what people need to do.
Drum roll.
Recognize what your leaders are doing. Understand that we're supporting a system of government that gives trillions of dollars to places like America and governments in the West, places that are then making sure that weaponry is prepared for establishing war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
A vicious cycle that's taking place that makes no sense. People are saying they're Shia, and then they go to Saudi Arabia. That's called Saudi Arabia for some God-forsaken reason that we don't know.
Yeah, if they could, they would call it Saudi Islam.
It makes no sense. They go to that country, they perform the Hajj after paying their life savings to a tyrannical government that has completely obliterated the real reason and meaning of Islam and has corrupted it so badly that Islam is now equal to the most terrible things that you can imagine according to the people. They have ruined Islam. The Middle Eastern leaders are essentially, as Abu Sadiq put it himself, agents of other systems and have obliterated their own societies, yet the Muslims are supporting them and anti the West, which makes no sense because they're also trying to get to the West and also trying to establish good lives there. So what are you doing? Why are you so confused? Who are you supporting? How can the Shia of Iran sit there and support the system of Wilayat al-Faqih? How can they support systems that are murdering girls for not covering their hair? What has happened to your senses and your understanding? Is this what Imam Hussain died for? Is this what the Prophet Muhammad came for? How have they destroyed the reputation of Islam to such a great extent? And then they expect that the Mahdi will come and clap his hands and say, well done? No, he won't. He will come and say, what you're doing is wrong. Let me take you somewhere else. Look into this call, look into this matter and find out why we're saying that these systems are wrong and why Imam Hussain was considered a criminal and why he was slandered and why he was accused and allegations were put against him. Unfair allegations, unjust and untrue allegations. Why? People think, they don't know this. They say, even the 12 Rishiyas, they say, hey, Imam Hussain was oppressed to the end. What they forget to realize is that Imam Hussain was a targeted victim who was called a lawbreaker, right? They called him a criminal. They called him an apostate. They called him blasphemous. They called him a heretic. Very familiar terms. I think if I don't forget too much, I think that they were saying the same thing about Abu Sadiq very recently.
Yeah, exactly the same things. The same things that they say about any revolutionary figure, about any complete word of God that came in a long train that goes from Jesus all the way to the Prophet Muhammad and the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, especially these individuals who were capable of completely giving the absolute complete word of God to creation, who had the ability to establish the throne of God on earth. These were the ones that were the most viciously attacked.
Exactly.
And Iblis particularly attacked them. And Imam Hussain is, of course, one of the greatest individuals to ever have existed. He's one of the Ahlul Kisa. He is the bringer of the seventh and final covenant along with his son Abu Sadiq, the second Mahdi. And together, this tag team will be victorious.
Yes. And speaking of Imam Ahmad Al-Hussain, we're going to wrap up the show on this. We're going to go to a quick excerpt from the sermon of Hajj.
Yes.
And the sermon of Hajj was an mind-blowing sermon. I mean, please go to the website, ahmadiyareligion.org, listen to that sermon. It was delivered by Imam Ahmad Al-Hussain in his very magnetic voice that drew thousands of people from around the world to come and pledge allegiance to him, and many to travel all the way to the lands of Egypt because the distress was too real. Once you heard that voice, you couldn't sit quietly at home. You had to do something about it. And Ahmad Al-Hussain, Imam Hussain, they're one and the same.
Let's do this today on the day of Ashura. Why don't we listen to this excerpt, enjoy it in the sense that it is a beautifully made video. It'll have an impact on your heart and your soul, on your spiritual journey. And then today at some point, go into a meditative space, sit down, close your eyes and just listen to the whole sermon from beginning to end. And the whole story of Karbala will appear in your mind's eye. The whole sermon is a sermon that wakes the soul up. And what a day to listen to it.
Yes. Perfect day.
Yes.
It's the perfect day. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please keep Imam Hussain in your thoughts, in your hearts today. Talk to God in your heart and ask Him to show you Imam Hussain, to help you understand who he is. And reach out if you want to know more. We're happy to talk to you about it anytime you need. And we will see you again tomorrow for another episode of Rise Up. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
والحق أقول لكم أيها المؤمنون إن يزيد لعنه الله لن يستطع قتل الحسين لأن الحسين عليه السلام ثار من أجل تثبيت حاكمية الله التي نقضت في السقيفة والشورى الكبرى. وقد نجح الحسين في تثبيت حاكمية الله، وأن الملك والتنصيب لله وبيد الله وليس للناس ولا بيد الناس. لقد كانت ثمرة دماء الحسين وأهل بيته وأصحابه أمة مؤمنة وقفت بوجه الطواغيت الذين تسلطوا على هذه الأمة، ولم ترضى هذه الأمة المؤمنة بتنصيب الله بدلا طوال أكثر من 1000 عام. ولكن جاء علماء آخر الزمان غير العاملين ليهدموا ما بناه الحسين بدمه الطاهر المقدس. جاءوا لتثبيت حاكمية الناس ونقض حاكمية الله، ولحسابات دنيوية رخيصة باعوا دين الله ظنا منهم أن عقولهم الناقصة قادرة على تشخيص مصلحة الأمة الدنيوية، مع أنهم لم ينظروا إلى مصلحة الأمة الأخروية مطلقا. والحق أقول لكم أيها المؤمنون إنهم لن يستطيعوا قتل الحسين عليه السلام، لأن الحسين عليه السلام وثورته الإلهية التي قامت على التنصيب الإلهي باقية بكم أيها المؤمنون. وسيرى العالم كله كربلاء جديدة على هذه الأرض، كربلاء فيها الحسين وأصحابه قلة يدعون إلى الحق وإلى حاكمية الله ويرفضون حاكمية الناس وديمقراطية أمريكا وسقيفة العلماء غير العاملين. كربلاء فيها شريح القاضي وشمر بن ذي الجوشن وشب بن ربعي، العلماء غير العاملين الذين يفتون بقتل الحسين. كربلاء فيها يزيد وابن زياد وسرجون والروم أمريكا من ورائه. وسيرى العالم ملحمة رسالة جديدة لعيسى بن مريم على الأرض المقدسة، وستكون أرض مقدسة فيها عيسى وحواريه قلة مستضعفة يخافون أن يتخطفهم الناس. ستكون أرض مقدسة فيها علماء اليهود الذين يطالبون بقتل عيسى، والرومان الأمريكان الذين يلبون مطالبهم ويحاولون قتل عيسى. قال عيسى عليه السلام: يا علماء السوء، ليس أمر الله على ما تتمنون وتتخيرون، بل للموت تبنون الدار وللخراب تبنون وتعمرون وللوارث تمهدون. لقد كانت وستكون كل الملاحم على هذه الأرض هكذا شاء الله، فلتكن مشيئة الرب الذي ينتصر لأوليائه لأنبيائه لرسله. ولقد سبقت كلمتنا لعبادنا المرسلين إنهم لهم المنصورون وإن جندنا لهم الغالبون. سينتصر رب محمد من الظالمين في هذه الأرض، سينتصر من ذراري قتلة الحسين لأنهم رضوا بفعل آبائهم. من شاء منكم أن يؤمن فليؤمن، الطاهر فليتطهر، بعد، والمقدس فليتقدس بعد، ومن شاء منكم أن يكفر فليكفر، وليظلم بعد، وليتنجس بعد. تابعوا علماءكم غير العاملين، اجمعوا الحطب وأججوا نارا لإبراهيم، واسخروا من نوح، وهيئوا السيف المسموم لهامة علي، وهيئوا خيلكم لترد صدر الحسين. لكني لن أساوم، لن أداهن، لن أكف عن مواجهة عثمان وفضحه على رؤوس الأشهاد. نعم، مواجهتي هذه أصعب بكثير من مواجهة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله لأصنام قريش، لأنها أصنام من حجارة. أما الأصنام التي أواجهها اليوم فهي أصنام تلبس زي رسول الله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. وتتشبه بحملة القرآن وتدعي النيابة عن الإمام. أصنام تحمل إرث أعداء الأنبياء والمرسلين، وتعرف كيف تحمل المصاحف على الرماح لينكسر جيش علي، ولكنها لا تفقه أن لا قوة إلا بالله. والحمد لله لست وحيدا، بل معي ثلة مؤمنة لي الشرف وكل الشرف أن أختمهم. حملوا الحق في صدورهم وساروا إلى الله، إلى النور، ولن يرضوا إلا بنور لا ظلمة معه. واتل عليهم نبأ نوح إذ قال لقومه يا قوم إن كان كبر عليكم مقامي وتذكيري بآيات الله فعلى الله توكلت فأجمعوا أمركم وشركاءكم ثم لا يكن أمركم عليكم غمة ثم اقضوا إلي ولا تنظرون. فلتكن مشيئة الرب هكذا، وكما كانت دائما أن ينتصر الطغاة ويقتل الرسل والمؤمنون. فما خلقنا للدنيا بل للآخرة. اللهم إن كان هذا يرضيك فخذ حتى ترضى، أو لتتبدل مشيئة الرب، أو لتتبدل مشيئة الرب هذه المرة يرى العالم كله قلة مستضعفة لا يملكون إلا يقينهم أن لا قوة إلا بالله، تنتصر وتهزم شر طغاة عرفتهم هذه الأرض